Hello everybody and welcome to my video. In today's video I want to demonstrate how to create a snowy sky using table salt. And before I started I wanted to show you some of the watercolour paintings where I've added salt to the image to create texture. So this is my bumblebee. I'm sitting in the middle of a sunflower, and as you can see I've added some table salt to create these beautiful kind of star sort of spidery textures going across the surface of the orange there, which is really pretty. I've done several paintings with salt in the past because I really love the exciting textures it creates. So this one's a still life, and as you can see I've simply used it as a background just to give the background some interest, and it sets off this lovely still life really nicely. There are lots of ways you can use the salt. This one is a night scene, and the salt is there to create the effect of sparkling stars in the sky, which I think is really pretty. So with this particular one I used less salt, and you can see that you do get these individual little specks within the colour on the surface, and it creates a nice contrast between the bottom section of the painting, which is very flat, very calm, and then you've got this beautiful sparkly texture at the top. So that's another one that I particularly like. And then finally I want to show you this painting. So this is a painting of some mushrooms in a field. Excuse me. So really close up, and we've got these beautiful blades of grass in the bottom, and it's sat on this lovely texture created by the salt technique in the background there. So those are different ways you can use the salt in your own paintings. Hopefully that's given you a little bit of inspiration. But now what I want to do is actually show you how to create that effect. Some people find it quite tricky, so I'm going to take you through step by step, and hopefully you'll get some success in future paintings. I'm going to take you through quickly the materials that I'm using today. So I am going to use everyday table salt. There's nothing special about this salt. It's normal granulated salt. I'm not using sea salt. You can use sea salt if you want to. Obviously they're larger crystals. They create a different effect. I'll probably do a second video and show you what that does and the difference it makes. So today we're just using normal table salt. I have stuck my watercolour sheet down to a board because we're going to use the wet in wet techniques. There's a lot of water involved. If I don't do that, the paper's really going to buckle out of control and the paint's going to move too much on the surface. So it's really important that you stick your paper down to a board or the tabletop. It's entirely up to you, whatever you have to hand. A piece of cardboard, stiff cardboard is really fine, like a corrugated board. If you stick some tape across the top, ordinary plastic tape or packaging tape or anything like that, if you cover the surface of the cardboard with that, then obviously it makes it waterproof, so you can get away with using just a sheet of cardboard. It's absolutely fine. I'm going to be using two brushes today, just a round brush. I think this one's a number 10 or 12, and then I'm going to use a second brush which is larger. This is a number 18, and I'm going to use that just to wet my paper surface. I've pre-mixed a kind of a grey, a neutral grey in here by using burnt umber and ultramarine blue, and in this section I just have ultramarine blue on its own. I'm just going to use two simple colours and show you how to get that beautiful salt technique texture for your paintings. I have two water pots. One is a large pot of water for cleaning off my brush. The other one has my pipette in it with clean water that I can use for mixing my paint. Okay, and also paper towel, really important, just to wipe your brush, keep that brush clean. Obviously paper towel can be used really creatively as well to lift paint off the paper, things like that, but today we're just going to be using it to clean my brush. Okay, Okay, so yeah, I think that's everything. Let's get started. Right, so to enable this technique to be successful and to work, we need to make sure that the paper is wet. So the first thing we do is take a big brush, clean water, and wet the entire surface of the paper. Just start at the top and work your way down. It's always good to be methodical about it, and then you know you haven't missed any sections. And keep going like that until you reach the bottom of the page. You don't want great big pools of water on the surface of your paper. You just want this water to start to soak in and to keep that paper damp as we do our technique, as we add the paint and obviously the salt as well. Okay, so the temperature in this room, I do have the heating on. It is winter time, and it's about 19 degrees in here, something like that. So the paper will begin to dry. So just make sure that you have your paints pre-mixed before you do this step, and then we'll be ready to go. So that's a nice even coat of water on the surface. If I tilt it for you, you might be able to see some reflection of the light, and you can see that there's no puddles, and it's just got a nice sheen to it, which is perfect. So I'm going to go straight into that grey colour that I've pre-mixed with a large round brush, and I'm going to place it down on the surface of the paper. I'm just showing you the technique here. I just want to create a nice sky, a kind of a moody sky, winter obviously, because we want it to be a snowy sky. Nice. So make sure you mix up enough paint that's going to cover the entire sheet of paper. So now I'm just going to rinse that off really quickly and go into the ultramarine blue, which is beautifully bright, and place this down. So the edges are beginning to dry already, so you do need to move reasonably quickly. And while I'm doing this, I'm just going to tilt my board a little to try and get rid of some of the paint marks that I've created, the brush strokes if you like, just to soften everything a little bit as I'm going. Getting right to the edges with my paint and going back into the grey that I've mixed now. Let's get some grey in the centre here. Okay, I'm just going to tilt it left and right as well, just to soften that whole, those marks off. Keep everything nice and soft. So as this dries, it's going to dry lighter, of course, it's watercolour. So don't be afraid to go a little darker than maybe you're used to. I'm just going to add some more grey in this section. Coming across the sky. Let's tilt it at an angle as well. See if we can get some interesting things happening on the surface before we use the salt. Okay. So I'm going to come down to low angle and check how wet the surface of the paper is. Now it's drying, it will dry from the edges in. The centre of your paper is always the most wet, and it's starting to buckle a little because of course there's a lot of water on that paper. I'm just going to quickly wipe around the edge just to remove that paint that's on my masking tape. That will stop it from being pulled back into the painting as it's drying. So notice I haven't added the salt as yet because it's a little bit wet. If you add it when the paper is soaking, then you don't get as good a result. So I just want to give it a few seconds to dry off a little bit. I'm going to tilt again. I want to dry at the edges more. That's fine. So it is beginning to dry. So I'm going to go in with some salt now. If I just show you, I've got a small amount of salt in the palm of my hand there. And I'm going to use my finger and thumb to pinch some. And from a height, I'm just going to drop it, sprinkle it onto the surface of the paper there that's wet. And you can add areas that have got, you can have it quite evenly sprinkled if you like, or you can concentrate maybe on the outside corners, or it's entirely up to you. Obviously you've got an idea of the sort of effect you want to create. Sometimes I like to focus on little areas with a little bit more salt, so you've got kind of, if I show you for example on this painting, there are areas where there's a lot of salt and then areas in between that haven't. So that creates quite a nice effect, and that would probably work quite well as a snow effect. So I'm going to pick the board up and show you a bit more closely. You can see there the individual grains of salt. You can also see the sheen on the paper. So I'm going to place this down. You need to leave it flat, and now it's important that you don't add any more paint or water to your picture. And now it's a case of being patient and just watching and waiting. I'm going to sit for a couple of minutes and keep an eye on what's happening on the surface, and actually I could add a little bit more salt here and there if I wanted to for the next couple of minutes, just while it's still a little bit wet. And I'll come back to you at the end once it's completely dry and we can reveal the texture that's been created by the salt. Okay, so it's been about 3 to 5 minutes and I can already see the salt technique working around the edges more than it is in the centre, because the centre was much more wet when I first applied the salt. So I've been watching and it's starting to dry off a little bit in this area, so now I'm happy to apply a little bit more salt in those areas. Now it's about right. Like I said before, if it's too wet it won't work, but now it's beginning to dry off. Just place down a little bit more salt in those areas and it should begin to take effect. So we'll just wait and see. Okay, so I'm back after probably about a total length of time of about 10 minutes, and I just want to show you how it's looking so far. So you can see that it is creating that lovely texture across the surface there. So that's roughly after about 10 minutes. So we have to wait for the entire thing to dry completely. It will continue working during that time, so it's probably best to go away, have a coffee or read a book or something, and then come back in an hour or so, maybe 2 hours, depending on how warm your room is and how dry the air is. And I'll see you in a little while. Hi again, so I'm back after roughly 2 hours and my painting is completely dry now. I've removed the tape from the edges, and as you can see, we've got this beautiful texture created by that salt. Just rub your fingers lightly across the surface, just to remove that salt. Very, very gently. And then you can tip it and give it a tap. And there we have it. Our lovely textured sky. So it sort of resembles a snowy sky, and it's really, really subtle in some places around the edges here where the paper had began to dry before I added the salt. And then you've got some really quite dramatic aspects here and there as well. So hopefully you'll get some success with the salt technique in the future if it's been causing you a few issues. Just remember that you don't want your paper too wet when you apply the salt, and don't mix your paint too thickly either, because that affects the overall look, and really it prevents the technique from being successful as well. So yeah, I hope you like that and you've enjoyed creating a snowy scene with me today. Have a lovely Christmas, take care, and join me again soon for my next watercolour tutorial.